Hello, we continue to study percentages, and today we're going to go into a very important topic in your everyday life, a skill you use on a daily basis as an adult and even as a young adult in middle school and high school, how to calculate percentage of a quantity. Let's hear the first word problem. There were 500 people at a concert. We are starting on page 147. There were 500 people in a concert. Of them, 30% were children. How many children? How many children were there at the concert? So there are two ways to think about it. We're going to start by introducing method one, and then we will continue to method two. So method one in a way is my favorite. Hopefully you will use one or the other. It doesn't matter as long as you're comfortable with both. Method one is always try to find 1% of the quantity. This is your first step. Find 1% first. If you know 1%, you will be able to calculate any percentage. In this problem, they're asking for 30. How do you find 1%? We know 1% is the same as 1 out of 100 equal parts. What does it mean to find 1 out of 100 equal parts? It means same as division by 100, which means you take your quantity, divide it into 100 equal parts, and you take one of them. That's your 1%. So let's go ahead. Find 1% of 500. Well, what is 1 out of 100 equal parts of 500? Well, it's 5, right? 500 divided by 5. It's 5 people. 5 people is 1%. Can we find 30%? Of course. 5 times 30, 150 children were at the concert. 150 children. Again, this method first asks you find 1%. How do we find 1%? Divide into 100 equal parts. Divide by 100. Now let's take a look at method 2. 30% of 100. Basically, the way it looks is the way we calculate it. How do we find 30% of 500? Well, remember from our previous lesson, 30% is 30 out of 100 equal parts. Now, can we multiply 30 hundredths, which is a fraction, times 500? Of course we can. Let's simplify before we multiply. Both 500 and 100 are divisible by 100, so this turns into 5, this turns into 1, and the answer is 30 times 5, which is 150 children. So two ways, essentially the same mathematics. Believe me, 500 divided by 100 is finding 1%. So let's practice. 10% of 200 is $20. Why is that? What you're doing is you're saying, well, what is 10 hundredths of 200? 20% of 200. You're asking yourselves 20 100ths of 200. We will calculate this later. Now, 50% of 200, I hope you realize 50% is 1/2. So essentially, we're looking for 1/2 of 200. And that's, of course, 100. We can put that number right, $100. 80% of 200. Well, we can think that 80 out of 100 equal parts of 200 is, so let's start from the top. 10 hundredths of 200. Let's go ahead. Step 1, divide, reduce before you multiply. 200 and 100 reduces to 1/2, and therefore we get 20, right? Now, 20 hundredths of 200. Again, let's simplify. 200 out of 100 reduces to 2 and 1. So 20 times 2 is $40. This answer is $40. Now, 1/2 of 200. Well, we already figured that out. Now, 80 hundredths of 200. Again, let's reduce 200 and 100 to 1 and 2. They're both divisible by 100. 80 times 2 is 160. So, $160, $40. Another method. Many students like to express, so we express percentages as simple as fractions. Another way students like to do it is express percentages as decimals, something we've done in a previous lesson. You can see it in a previous video. 10% is 0.1, 20% is 0.2, 50% is 0.5, 80% is 0.8. Now, off 200, off 200, off 200, off 200. If you do the math, you will come up with exactly the same answers. Again, there are two ways to think about it. You represent percentage as a simple fraction, or you can represent percentage as a decimal. Let's solve a few word problems. In a school, 120 students took part in a physical fitness test. 90% of them passed the test. How many students passed the test? Remember, 90% is, wrong color, is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 out of 10 equal parts, right? That's what 90% means. It's 9 out of 100. We can say, however, here we're doing 90% of 120. How would we think about it? Again, one way and the second way. You can say 90 out of 100 times of 120, right? Off means multiply in mathematics. Now, there are two ways to think about it. 120 and 100 is 1 and 1.2. 90 times 1.2 equals 108. 108 students. Now, another way to think about it is as a decimal, 0.9 times 120. 0.9 times 120. Look, we have equivalent statements, right? But 9 times 120 times 12 is 108. 108, 1080, and then take away one decimal. Of course, again, 108 students took the test. Another way to think about it, there's so many different ways. We can say, let me pick up. Do we have a black pencil? No, we don't. We can say 120 divided into 10 equal parts. We can say 12, 12, 12, 12, 12, 12, 12, and so on. And 12 times 9 equals 108. Next word problem. Lindsay bought a refrigerator which cost $800. She had to pay 8% sales tax on $800. How much was the sales tax? How much was the sales tax? Well, we write 8% of 800. Now, again, one way to think about it, we can say 8 out of 100 of 800. And then, of course, we start simplifying. 800 and 100 reduced to 1 and 8. And therefore, the answer is 8 times 8 equals $64. Another way to think about it is 0.0800 times 800. And 8 times 8 and 64, if you do multiplication of decimals, you will also get $64. $64. Now, let's do the next problem. The area of a garden is 60 squared meters. 7% of it is taken up by a pond. Okay, what area is taken up by a pond? Well, we know majority of the garden is probably garden and plants and vegetables, but 7%, 7 out of 100 equal parts of 60 is taken up by a little pond. So let's go and start reducing. 60 and 100 are both divisible by 10, reduces to 6, and 10 equals, let's multiply. So we're going to do 7 tenths times 6. We can say it's 42 tenths or 4.2 meters squared. That's one way of getting the answer. The second way of getting the answer, I do like to show that both ways are perfectly okay. We can display the 7% as a decimal, 0.07 of 60. We can say 7 times 6 is 42 or 420, and take away 2 decimal places is the same as 4.2, which we got write using the first method. So both methods are perfectly okay, whichever you prefer. Next problem. There were 5 words in a spelling test. Sally spelled 90% of them correctly. How many words did she spell correctly? Well, we can do 90 hundredths, right? Which we can immediately simplify to 9/10, no problem, of 50, right? Let's go to town and reduce. 50 and 10 are divisible by 10. This turns into 5. Therefore, 9 times 5 equals 45 words she spelled correctly. Now, another way to think about it is 0.09. Oh, so sorry, 90%. My bad. 0.9 times 50. 9 times 5 is 45. 9 times 50 is 450. And we take away one decimal place, gives us 45 words. Same answer. Whether we start with a fraction or a decimal, with a fraction or a decimal, with a fraction or a decimal, we of course arrive with the same answer. So let's practice this. Let's practice. My friends, I'm a big fan of simple fractions. I'm a big fan of simple fractions. I'm also a big fan, so for this exercise down below, I'm going to teach you a very simple way of figuring out percentages of quantity. My favorite way is already been mentioned. Step 1, find 1%. Find 1%, which is the same as 1 out of 100, or divide into 100 equal parts, right? 2 multiplied times 100 is the same as to divide by 100. So we can think of like that. Let's go. This is very important practice. 5% of 300. Well, we know that 1% of 300 is 3. 5% is 5 times 3 equals 15. 8% of 200. We know that 1% is 2, right? 200 divided by 100. 8 times 2 equals 16. 16. 20% of 60. Well, we know that 20% is 20 out of 100, which is the same as 1/5. And 1/5 of 60 is 12. This case is kilograms. Now, 25% of 40. We know 25% is 1/4 of 40 equals 10 meters. 40% of 70. We can think of 40 hundredths of 70. We can think of like that, or we can also say 0.4 of 70. 7 times 4 is 28. 280, take away 1 0. It's 28 kilometers. And finally, 75% of 400. We can always think of 75 hundredths and simplify down to 3/4. 3/4 of 400 gives us, simplify, gives us 300 grams. 300 grams. Put your answers in a circle or a little box for your teacher. I hope